Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On this episode, I want to talk about something that we all experience within the lifestyle. Not so much that it even has to just pertain with the lifestyle. It pertains to who we are at our core, our emotional responses and our behaviors. These are the things that make us who we are, how we react to things. Certain movies make us cry if we get scared at watching a horror film. But there is another side to all of these things. Our pre-programmed responses to when we're getting involved in relationships. If we think about it, these are the things that growing up we're taught as part of our behavioral training. Our parents or our caregivers at any given moment are teaching us what love is, what trust, caring, kindness, compassion, for the most part. I realize that everybody doesn't experience all of these things growing up as a child. But if we're talking, for the most part, normalized, we go through this gambit of emotions. If our father was an alcoholic, if our mother was never around, we tend to look for people later in life that kind of emulate these responses because we end up subconsciously and unconsciously gravitating towards these people because this is what we know. It is possible to break all of these cycles. Sometimes it's easier for some and it's difficult for others. And between the two sexes, there's not really one sex that's greater at it than others. Although with women, because they're much more emotionally in touch with who they are, for the most part, it allows them to be in tune and understand their emotions better. So they'll talk with their friends, they'll have conversations about their relationships, they might have a very close conversation or relationship with their mother, and they'll share and convey their thoughts and feelings at any given moment. This allows them to explore and expand on who they are and what makes them do what they do, right? We have to understand this when we start looking even in the realm and the context of BDSM. Why at some given point some people are masochists, some people gravitates towards being a dominant, or every other little thing along the way. Because there are things in our life that we've ended up attaching to that end up making sense to us later on that give us that sense of comfort. For example, many powerful men, powerful people in powerful positions around the world, senators, doctors, lawyers, professors, heads of industry. Turns out that in reality, through all of that power, all of that decision making, the one thing that they really gravitate towards is giving all of that up because they don't want to be in control. And this isn't as big of a misnomer as most people think. But this emotional responses that they end up having goes back to earlier in childhood at some given point where they may have been robbed from something, meaning that time to be that innocence of just growing up, they were thwarted with a plethora of responsibility, and that can be overwhelming for a pre-adolescent, an adolescent, or even a young adult. We're not always ready for that. When it comes to men, though, men become a little bit different. And speaking as a man, I can understand this. Growing up, it was never about allowing us to express emotions. We're always told, don't cry. Crying is for girls. Crying is for, babies. Men don't do that. We're genetically inside of us, we're pre-programmed with those responses of the protectors, of the hunters. And as we move forward, shedding emotion for us conveys a spot of weakness. Now, we've learned over time, and we understand that over time, showing emotional vulnerability doesn't make you weak, but it allows one to express that side of themselves that at any given moment is completely repressed. Now, we can look at the different facets of how the world has evolved over the last 50 years. We've had more advancements in 50 years than we've had in the last few hundred. We've gone to, we've been to space. medical innovations, technological innovations is incredible. But humankind still is stuck in some of these predispositions where some of the things that we are experiencing, we don't necessarily know how to handle. So our emotions kind of end up guiding us on this journey. Sometimes we don't fully understand them. For some of us, we turn to social media and we look at the foundations that are organized there and how people respond and act, and they put on a persona. Some people try to emulate that because they think it's going to end up resonating with them, and then it turns out when they dive into that world, that persona for them doesn't fit, and they can't necessarily figure out why. So all of a sudden they're caught up in these moments of being more flamboyant, taking more risks that they were never emotionally prepared to do. And they slowly discover along this journey, because that's not who they are, that this isn't what they really want to be doing. And it's an eye-opening moment. We can look at the other foundations of our emotional responses and our behaviors when we look at something like organized religion. With organized religion, it teaches us discipline and focus. It gives people faith and hope in something that's unexplained. So when things happen that they can't fully explain, they can label it and put it there. But we've even seen problems within the church. Understanding that religion isn't healthy, that sometimes obviously that all of that power corrupts those people. They take advantage of it, abuse happens, and we lose that faith, and we lose that sensibility inside of us. We still are struggling well into adulthood to start to manage and understand what our emotions are and how we respond to any given situation. If I look the back and forth between the differences between the two, with men, we have a huge disassociation between our emotional and our mental involvement, meaning we tend to see things quite logically. We dismiss the emotional side of ourselves because that doesn't then factor in what we need to get done. When I served in the military, all of our operations, everything that we did was logic based and had an end goal. There wasn't too much time in certain situations, and other of my fellow service members weren't always available or put into situations where they had the opportunity to explore whether or not their emotional judgment could be used. And frankly, most of the time, it can't. So when we start to look at this imbalance between our emotional and our mental sides, we start fluctuating within who we are. This kind of carries over into some of our relationships when we start gravitating towards those relationships that they're not fully healthy for us. Or we end up finding somebody that's extremely healthy for us. We don't know what to do when we find somebody that ticks all of our boxes, so unconsciously we rebel against it and we self-sabotage. Our emotions play a pivotal role in everything we do. Suppressing them obviously magnifies on a large scale what ends up happening to us throughout our lives. I had remembered having a conversation with a colleague about some of the people that we'd done some research on long ago, and then one of the research participants ended up becoming a client. And they had talked about their suppression of so much emotions over this person's lifetime that he was unable to cry. He could no longer reach the point. There was no of an emotional response. There was no happy crying. So the birth of his daughter, his ability to express joy was severely hampered. Conversely, when his parents passed away at their funerals, he was unable to cry and release and give that form of grief. When we lock our emotions away and we, as men, feel that we're just running around being blubbering idiots or being told that, we're less than because we're expressing our emotion, it further hampers, for men, our emotional growth moving forward. Our identities get lost. We know that we're emotionless. We're not emotionless. We know what anger is. We know what love feels like. We definitely know what lust feels like. We know when we like somebody or we like something. We cheer for our favorite sports, or we're in love building a car. Whatever things that men, whatever hobbies or interactions men have. But our abilities as humans to start understanding who we are emotionally really doesn't start taking place well into our 30s. Now, there are some people who are going to say, okay, I knew who I was emotionally at 20 years old. Well, I would argue that at 20, we're still learning who we are. At 40, I was still learning who I was. We're out there. Every experience we have builds to our collective foundation of the person we've become, but it also changes our opinions. There are some people that are quite stoic, and you can't change them. They're unchangeable. But then when you even look at those people, you have to ask that question, what are they withholding emotionally that they're not allowing any personal growth? When I take this and we kind of slap this into the BDSM realm, because that's part of what I'm trying to do here, we have to look at those times when we see all of this chatter that dominants express little to no responses to their submissives. Well, each dominant is going to be different, and each role inside of dominance is going to be different. From mistresses to masters, from daddy doms to mommies, to just straightforward dominance. All of these roles, even tops, are all going to have their own way they're going to communicate. I think one thing that I heard recently from quite a few submissives was that they'd wish that their dominant would express more how they were feeling in the interaction, even in the aftercare. It wasn't that the aftercare was lacking, and that emotional and physical response and the cuddling and giving somebody food and taking care of them. But they were also missing part of that equation is the emotional response and feedback from the person they're with, from their dominant, their top, whomever. Now, it's not all dominants don't do this, but I would say there is a good majority, because I took a very quick poll of some people that I had some interactions with. And out of about 26 or 27 people, of all of these dominants, in private, admitted less than half give their emotional response in aftercare. Less than about 3/4 express their emotions during the course of their dynamics. Well, the further answer and the further probing I got into this, and obviously this is a small number. This isn't a grand scheme research that I was conducting. It was just a very cursory questions, a couple of questions that I had. What I found was interesting was that they are very concerned. Dominants are obviously we're quite concerned to take care of our submissives. That's what we want to do. Serve submissive. The submissives are going to serve us. We are going to dominate. We are going to set up all of the functions. We are going to take care of all of the things, and go from there. We're going to make sure that everything is kind of running smoothly. But the reality is that the one part of this equation that's kind of lacking is that they're not giving a big part of themselves. Sure, they're giving themselves physically and mentally. There's definitely going to be a lot of room for intimacy there between themselves and the submissive. But there is a part of themselves, and it's a big part of themselves, that they are withholding. Now, it's up for debate whether or not sharing your emotional responses with somebody you're getting involved with. It's also going to depend dynamic to dynamic. A service top, for example, will only basically be there to kind of run their service bottom through the sets of play, and then at the end, both people are going their own way. For the most part, that's not going to work for every negotiated scene or negotiation between the two people or the negotiated party. But the reality is, for those that have gone into the dynamics where feelings are starting to get talked about, when I start seeing the words, love or care, or I'm seeing all of these pet names or they're referring to, or the loving glances, there is the missing out on that part of the exchange where they're not, at least with the dominants, sharing that side of themselves. So how do we get people to open up? Opening up provides a great thing. It allows us to be vulnerable. It allows us to share. And for dominants, I think some of them, and the response was interesting, that they feel by sharing their emotional side with their submissive, it could in turn reduce the power balance between the two. I would actually argue it would strengthen it. It would allow their submissive to see that this person, we're not walking gods. We don't walk on water. We don't soar on clouds. I know some of them do, right? We can't touch water and make wine. I know some think that they are. I know that there are some dominants out there that think they are God's gift to BDSM or the lifestyle or the fetish community. That's wonderful. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's just not true. The reality is, if we start to share that side of ourselves, to allow that vulnerability to come through, we can also give somebody a further understanding into who we are and what makes us tick, allowing them to become more responsive and trust. Because the BDSM dynamic is built on communication, trust, consent, and all of these other things, and massive effort. If we are expecting so much of our submissives to give quite a bit of this, dominants also have to move forward as well and start venturing out into that emotional range that isn't always comfortable, that can sometimes actually make us uncomfortable. But through that uncomfortability, that vulnerability, we end up tying ourselves closer together to the person we are, because we've now allowed them to see a part of us that they didn't previously see before. The same can be said for submissives, because I know there are submissives out there that don't show emotion. I know of one submissive that I had spoken to that was berated by a dominant for not showing any response at all. That was, first off, the dominant was wrong to call out this submissive, because any response, no response is still a response. Because they weren't moved doesn't mean they weren't moved, or they were moved. They just didn't care to share it. And that becomes problematic too when we're starting to hold either side or anybody in any type of a relationship by saying, oh, well, you're not giving me enough. You're not sharing enough with me. Well, we share what we need to share. But I know with some submissives, when they start to go from dynamic to dynamic and people get hurt, we tend to play our cards a little closer to our chest. But allowing that vulnerability within to move forward allows us to express to that other person, almost like a test. If I'm willing to share a little bit and they're willing to share a little bit, then maybe, we have found the person that we can start putting more of that trust into, more effort into, and feel safe and secure around them. I know that sometimes in some of my past relationships, or with some of the clients that I have, or even some of the talks that I give, I ask this question: how often per week inside of your dynamic do you share? I'm talking a dynamic that's gone at least longer than 6 months. I'm not these fly-by-night dynamics that are 3, 4, 5 days old, or a couple of weeks old, and they're already calling each other names. That's going to end up being a discussion for a different show. I'm talking dynamics and relationships that are really starting to stand some time. Stand to benefit from emotionally sharing with one another. When you do that, you're going to end up taking your dynamic to a deeper place. If you're hitting the 6-month mark and you're not, either one of you is holding back on your emotions, you then have to ask yourself, what's the expectation here? Is this really, am I the right person to be inside of this? Why can't I share? Do you need to talk to somebody about your emotions? Are you scared of taking the shot? Because the other person is going to start seeing that possibly as something, a personal slight against them, or they don't feel that you trust them. We have to remember that the lifestyle is wrapped around trust, consent, and effort and communication. If we're failing on any one of these levels, well, the other person's going to know. And soon enough, their interest in being inside of that dynamic is going to start to wane. And if you're single and you're still struggling with some of these things, when we start to struggle with these issues, it may keep us out of a dynamic. It may keep us from getting involved in conversations or going out to witness a exhibition or a demonstration or go to a munch or go to a play party because we don't know how to get these things under control. Sometimes you have to not worry about taking a chance, and other times you have to learn that, hey, you know what, if I can't manage, I need to talk with somebody, and that's okay. But either way, no matter what you're going to do moving forward in a dynamic, in a relationship, take stock of your emotional range and understand your emotional limitations, not just your physical ones. Understand what you're willing to tolerate, what you're willing to accept, what you're open to emotionally. It might just give you some new insights, not only into yourself, but into your dynamic or your future relationships that might make your experiences inside of the BDSM and fetish community a whole lot better. If anything, it's at least something to consider. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay keen.